Hannah's story is awesome, and one of the reasons we're going to be talking with her today is, I think we all think her story is quite inspiring. Her journey from being an architect and working in the world of architecture, doing everything from architecture of things like hospitals and some pretty important stuff, to doing equally more important work, making excellent beverages. For those of you who weren't here a moment ago, I'm currently drinking a Saigon Cider Original Apple. We think we'll be talking about availability later on, around where you can find Hannah's products. So in terms of introducing Hannah, and without talking too much more about ABN, besides the fact that we'd love to have you check out our website, Asia Brewers Network. If you type it into Google, you'll find us. We also organize the Asia Beer Championship as well, and Brew Asia technical sessions, though a lot of that stuff now is virtual. Recently Hannah did very well at the Asia Beer Championships. It's not just beer, by the way, it's also cider as well. Hannah, just remind me, what did Saigon Cider win at the Asia Beer Championship?
This year we picked up a bronze in the apple cider category for the one you're drinking there, and also a bronze for the apple and ginger in the I think it's specialty cider category. So there are two categories. Yeah, thank you.
It's awesome. It's awesome to get that recognition. I think even getting recognized in one category is great, let alone two. It's a huge achievement, and it's really recognition of the work you guys have been doing. So I think today really want to talk with Hannah a bit about the trials and tribulations of her setting up a cidery in Southeast Asia. The word cidery is quite cool. I didn't really know it existed, to be honest, until we were talking about this. I always assumed it was kind of like a cider company. I've been loving this new word, cidery. I think one of the things, if you don't know, and before we go into the chat with Hannah, and I promise I won't talk too much before we talk to the real person we're keen to speak to today. I mean, cider is really taking over the world right now, and in Asia Pacific, the cider market's growing at 8% a year right now, and it's predicted to grow at that rate for the next few years. And I think, for us at ABN, I think generally cider deserves much more attention. It's something that, I think if you're very interested in beer, it's easy to forget, cider is a really fascinating beverage in its own right. It's actually production processes, and look, I'm not pretending to be an expert. That's why we have Hannah here on a cider perspective, but the production process is is different. It's quite different to beer. I understand, and Hannah can maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's actually it's a bit closer to wine in terms of the
much more similar
process. Yeah, and so I think it's something that's really interesting. And I think, look, if you're just tuning in, thank you so much for joining. We're talking with Hannah from Saigon Cider, which is one of the region's most successful cideries around Asia Pacific. I think cider, again, it's something that even personally I feel like I've not devoted enough attention to, as someone who's really gotten into the beverage scene in the last few years. It's something that I'm now really interested in. And again, Saigon Cider is making some great ciders. But I think today, we'll be talking a bit about Hannah's journey to building Vietnam's leading cidery, and over the last few years, really in terms of the prospects for growth in the region. And I think really talking about just some of the opportunities and the recent recognition that she's received as well. And really, I think just finding out a bit more about cider and a bit more about about her business. So Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you. It's fantastic to have you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
So look, I guess, for the audience who really aren't familiar with you or familiar with Saigon Cider, tell us a bit about yourself, a bit about Saigon Cider. I think that would be really interesting for people outside of Vietnam who maybe aren't familiar with you to find out a bit more.
Okay, well, it was kind of an accident. I was working out here as an architect in Vietnam. I came here almost 10 years ago, working on resorts and things like that, and working kind of above the level I'd get to work at home, and enjoying it. And then the economy was taking a bit of a turn to follow the rest of the world, and I ended up on some lovely healthcare projects, which were boring me out of my mind. So it was kind of 9 to 6 plus, and then really just make the most of the weekend, because you're locked in at work throughout the week, working your ass off, and then drink, repeat. And there was no cider here, but it's, I would say, cider drinking weather. It's definitely a more summery drink for us at home. And it's hot here, obviously, all of the year. So it started kind of as a bit of a joke to myself. I would make some. I ended up eventually trying to make cider, and it came out pretty okay. The founder of Fuzzy Logic was one of the first to try it. We were neighbors. So then I started doing markets, and the architecture world was getting a bit dull to me. It wasn't really what I'd entered the industry for. I wanted to make an impact, but in a creative way. But in reality, I was practicing between kind of the start of the world financial crisis and when that followed me to Vietnam. So during that time, there wasn't a lot of projects getting realized. And I think healthcare was really the final straw. So I started making the cider, and then I jumped fully into that and away from architecture. So
how was that? Like, that's to me, it seems like such a drastic leap. How did you feel about making that jump from like quite a formal professional industry to one that's so, in a way it's both the creative industries, but making cider must have been how did that change? Tell us about how you felt about the change, what you went through during that period.
Well, it's a risk, of course, and it was daunting. I didn't really have much behind me, but also in Vietnam, you can get by for longer on a low income, which would be necessary, starting something like this. So I decided to take the plunge, and I didn't really envisage how long it would take to properly get going, and what the requirements would be, because I had to figure it out as I went. But I'd got so far in, so I continued, and then it went on like that until the present day. And we've been much more official in the last 2 years, but it was actually founded more than 7 years ago. So the brand's been around a while.
And so, that journey in Vietnam, right? I guess rewinding back, you're originally from the UK,
yeah,
right? And
that's right.
You were talking about cider weather and cider, and I guess in cider, that's the right place for cider. I'm kind of curious about your background with cider before you came to Vietnam. And was cider something that you grew up with? Was it a beverage that you kind of enjoyed when you were, when you were younger? What was your relationship with cider before you came to Vietnam? Because I'm assuming that Saigon Cider maybe wasn't in the plan, wasn't in the playbook.
Exactly, it wasn't really planned, not at all. So yeah, I did grow up actually in an orchard. My back garden used to be an orchard, and there were some remaining apple trees. Yeah, we had 3 of the remaining trees from the previous use of the land. And so I very much grew up on the doorstep of a lot of the great cideries in Somerset. And like a lot of people from that region, that's the first drink you try with your parents at the table. And it's also probably quite easy.
So it's a table drink. It's a table drink in Somerset.
Not only, it's also something you'd have at the pub as a pint, as you would have a beer. But it's quite easy drinking, I guess, because it's fermented fruit juice. So it's an easy drink to start with. So it's the first thing that your parents will maybe let you try. And I think we even have relaxed rules on cider, or at least France do. There's a younger age at which you can have a cider in a restaurant with your parents. I think in France it's 14, UK maybe 16. So yeah, I was very familiar with it, and definitely in the region there's a huge variety of cider. Everything from the very muddy orange juice looking, hard to drink, weird tasting ciders, right through to the very light, sweet, flavored, more commercial pear ciders. So,
well, what you're making is certainly not the former. By the way, for those of you who are just tuning in, I'm actually having one of Hannah's delicious original apple organic craft ciders. Hannah, you're having is it the apple chili cider? Am I correct on that?
Yes, apple chili. Here it is.
Apple chili. So, I mean, so speaking of that kind of growing up around it, was cider on your bucket list then? Was it something that
Not at all, no.
No.
Before I came here, I actually didn't drink beer. It was my drink of choice.
Cider?
Yes.
Right. Sorry, dumb question, but, worth asking.
Yeah. I didn't drink beer until I came to Vietnam, when there was
Really?
Yeah, I'd maybe had a couple of beers because I just didn't like it at all. I would drink wine. Cider was the easiest kind of thing to drink when your friends are drinking beer. But I really, like a lot of people I know, actually didn't like beer.
And do you think when, was part of the reason you set up Saigon Cider to resolve that personal need in Vietnam to actually have something that you wanted to drink?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd seen it really take off in the UK, Australia as well. I lived in Sydney for a year. There was only the 3 types of Strongbow available. It just wasn't really something that people would drink. And now the cider market in Australia has just exploded. And that's kind of happened in every country that it's touched. So it was kind of a no-brainer business idea. It's, I would say, easy drinking. It appeals even to people who think they don't really like alcohol, but when they try that, they do. So I presumed that a lot of people in Vietnam would also quite like cider. So,
and it's proved to be the case, right?
Yes, it has. There's still a lot of a lack of awareness about the category. So I will often have customers call it cider beer. Which in a way, it helps people get to know our brand because, they know craft beer. So then they will want to try us thinking it's another craft beer. So that's helpful because we're part of a wider network because of craft beer. However, we do need people to understand that it's different because we're actually an alternative to beer. So when people are tired of drinking beer or they can't drink beer for various reasons, then we want to be the choice. So if people think that cider is just another beer, that's a bit confusing. And also when you try something which you think is a beer and then it's actually cider, that's quite a shock. So we want people to really understand. We want the market to understand that it is different. It's fermented juice. It's got some acidity. It's really entirely different to beer.
And I mean, in that evolution, I mean, since obviously you've been building the brand for a few years, you're now at a point where you guys are starting to get a lot of regional recognition, success. I mean, what is your strategy now in terms of trying to break through with Vietnamese consumers, at least in terms of convincing them to drink more of your product?
Okay, so I mean, it's just constant plugging away and events and keeping up the activity, but also with Vietnamese, because they're not necessarily familiar with cider and what's inside the bottle, they will largely go on what's outside. So we need to make some tweaks so that they know that's a more premium product. Cider, when it's made actually from juice, has a huge cost. So in order for people to accept the cost, they need to see it as very premium. So we need to think from this perspective of someone who doesn't know cider and find ways to attract them to the product without knowing really much about what's inside. So we need to make some improvements in that area. But I think in terms of the actual taste of the product, it is in line with the palate here.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, I mean, I know it's not super kosher to talk about this kind of stuff, but one funny thing that I've heard about cider here is that a lot of people see it as not being alcoholic. Because you were talking before
Yes,
about it, that it's beer. But I mean, I've heard stories about. I mean, don't worry, we're not encouraging kids to drink, but I've even heard stories about families thinking it's fruit juice.
yeah, I frequently see kids in the convenience stores drinking
Shouldn't laugh, but
ciders, not my ciders, but the cheap ciders.
yeah, other people's commercial stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I've seen it given away free with kids' meals by people who obviously don't realize it's alcohol. But I've also had comments from people here, not necessarily Vietnamese, but I think other people, other expats, but from Asia, who didn't really pay attention to the number, the ABV, even when I told them, because they didn't consider if it was beer or spirits that it was genuinely an alcohol. So it was interesting for me to get my head around, but the ABV didn't seem to matter. So I was trying to get one mum not to give it to her kid. And I mean, the whole
ABV. I mean, the ABV on what I have here is on your original apple, it's 4.9, right? And on your apple and ginger, it's 4.7. Is that your target range?
Yes, we like to keep it around that range, and I'd love to introduce a lower one. Actually, there's quite a lot of talk about low alcohol beers lately. I think for cider, it's maybe even more appropriate to have a low alcohol cider, because it's not only the people who don't like beer, but the people who want something a bit more easy to drink or lighter are frequently more interested in cider than beer. So
yeah, but I mean, is it the sessionability and the heat? Well, sorry, I'm curious to hear what you were saying as well.
Yes, I think it is that, and being able to have a few drinks and just not feel so drunk. I think you get drunker faster when it's hot. And these days, I'd say I also prefer low alcohol beverages, especially if you want to try a couple of things. It's kind of disappointed if after your second drink, you just cannot really use your brain anymore. I'd much rather stick to lower alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as well. I mean, like, we are seeing that trend in the beer industry as well, right? Where I guess, like lower ABV. I think there was this ridiculous idea that everything had to be. There was this ridiculous idea in brewers' minds that you had to make high ABV products to create value in the consumer's mind, which then created the culture with consumers of creating value, and it kind of became the cycle where when actually a lot of people, I mean, myself included, I'd much prefer to have more sessionable, lower ABV beverages. Particularly in a hot climate. I mean, I know that you guys currently have 3 core flavors. Is that right? 3 core styles that you offer?
Yeah, that's right. The 3 core. Yeah, and then we have just introduced some seasonals as well, starting with Christmas spice, which we've run in previous years, but it's the first time it's been made on a bit of a bigger scale.
What is Christmas spice?
Okay, so that's using mainly Vietnamese spices, so cinnamon, star anise. It does also have some cloves in there, which are from elsewhere. And then oranges, which are in season at the moment, and also some nice deep brown sugar. We don't usually add sugar to our ciders, but for the Christmas one, it's really essential. It's one of the key tastes in like a mulled wine. We've made basically a mulled cider, but a cold sparkling variety, which is in kegs. It's on tap. So it's that taste of Christmas for the hot weather.
Oh, that sounds lovely. And I know in the past, have you made it? Was it a cashew nut cider?
Yes. So it wasn't cashew nut. It was the cashew fruits. So the fruits which get discarded, that grow above the nut, they get discarded. You won't even find them in the markets usually, because they are going bad within a matter of hours of falling off the tree or being picked. So they're usually just put back on the land as nutrients, or some local people will use them to juice them, or they're given as feed, but they're actually an amazing flavor, very potent, tropical, and incredibly astringent, which goes away when you ferment them. So we fermented these. We went and picked them on some farms in the next province, brought them back in cool boxes, and quickly juiced them and then fermented them, because you just can't wait more than a few hours. So that was probably our most out there weird cider. Got the reactions that you might get to durian. Some people absolutely loved it. Some people thought it was too weird, but it got a lot of attention and was the most interesting one to make, where we actually had to go and pick them ourselves and then rush back to make the cider.
We actually just got a comment from Sue-Ann saying that she'd love to try durian cider. Is that something that you have up your sleeve?
Oh my God. Can she come and make it for me? I don't want to go near those fruits. Not at the moment. No, I don't think so. But maybe a very small batch in a hazmat suit.
Well, durian beer now is back on draft in Saigon, so perhaps, perhaps, yeah, you can try it. If anyone's listening in Saigon, Rehab Station, which is a craft beer bar, now has a New England durian IPA. So, and it's got real durian fruit in it. At least when I drank it about a month ago, and yeah, I'm a durian fan. Hannah, I take it you're not.
No, I'm not.
Perhaps it's the Welsh ancestry doesn't predispose you to the Southeast Asian tropical fruits. I mean, speaking, look, we've been talking a bit about Saigon cider, the styles you've been making, the fruits you've been using, kind of the initial story. But I'm also kind of keen to hear about, because I think a lot of the people listening on ABN are building their small business people, right? A lot of the people here are, or they're dreaming. I think a lot of people here are dreaming about running their own business, right? They're maybe working in a bigger company and dreaming about setting up their own company. I mean, and as well, I think a lot of people here have small breweries, maybe even some cideries are listening in. I mean, for the people who are kind of at the initial struggle stage of building their business, maybe they're in the development stage that you were in for a few years as well before you kind of built the business structures up. I mean, what's the key advice you would give them? What's the few pieces of advice? Because obviously there's the formal business stuff, right? We can talk about all the formal business bullshit about, but I'm curious to hear your advice for someone who's maybe in a similar place to where you were maybe 4 or 5 years ago. What advice you would share with them about, turning their passion into a commercially successful business?
Yeah, it's a tough question, because there's a lot to consider. I suppose if you're doing what I'm doing on a shoestring, which is kind of what we have been doing, then there's so many ups and downs. You just have to not give up. If you easily quit, then this is not for you, because there will always be problems, and you'll solve one set of problems and then you will come up against a new set, a larger scale set of problems. So being very determined and realizing that, I think, is important. And if that's not for you, then maybe employment is a better choice. Setting up your own business is not, the most stable thing to do. So you have to be able to weather many storms and just keep going. But also, I think putting value on being very careful and valuing I value having a partner. I did this alone, so I would in hindsight have a partner at the same kind of bring them in at the beginning. It's very different having investors who are not operational. Having someone who really shares the day-to-day operational decisions and the tough stuff is so valuable. So if you can, then don't go into this alone.
So sharing the load is worth the sacrifice of
absolutely.
Of getting, yeah.
I think with me, it wasn't that I didn't want to share with someone. I just never really came across anyone who was going the same direction. who expressed an interest in running a cider company. So with me, it was kind of consequential, but I would definitely not try to work alone if you have the option to have partners on board.
I mean, on the point you touched on before, right? You were talking about, and look, by the way, I think that's a great piece of advice to a lot of people out there who are considering setting up their own businesses, right? And I mean, I would, personally as well, I'd echo the same sentiment. Like setting it up with other people has, obviously there are downsides to it. There are always challenges to any journey, any path, but having other people around you is so helpful. Even whether they're formally involved or even informally involved as mentors or as investors. You mentioned before you do have investors. I mean, without going too deeply into it, because obviously there's an element, you can't reveal all your business or the trade secrets. But I mean, one thing that I've come across, and someone's actually dropped me a question about this already today during the chat. I mean, if you were, if someone was, let's say, running a small cidery anywhere in the world or a small brewery, I mean, how do you, is there anything that you can advise them on if you're looking for investment? Because it's something I think that our industry is pretty bad at talking about openly, right? We're not very good at talking about money and investment. People try and talk big talk, but if someone was looking for investment, are there any pointers, or is there even one key pointer you would advise them on if they were trying to seek external investment to realize their dream or realize their brewing business?
It's so difficult because it depends so much on where you're making and what the laws are there. But on the whole, something which I think applies to everyone is to work with people who either have fully stepped out of the. Sorry, did you lose me there? Hello?
Yep, no, good. Still coming through loud and clear.
Okay. So bring people in who, if they're going to be involved, that they're helping you and they're really running the business with you, or have them very much silent, because somewhere in the middle of that doesn't work. So I guess take your time to choose the right people.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because I think that's a great takeaway, right? It's like get people who are, get a partner who's super involved, or a group of partners, or have people who are really happy with your vision, right, and willing to fund your vision, but then kind of like, try and avoid people who want to get involved without, having a situation where they kind of, I guess, compromise your vision, but then don't want to get as involved as a partner.
Yes, so people involved in the decisions around the vision need to really be also participating. Otherwise, step out.
That's great advice. And it's funny because so many people don't follow that, right? I mean, it sounds like it's actually common sense, isn't it? But so many people need to hear that and actually need to apply that, don't they?
Well, I suppose if you've never worked with partners before, why would you know? It doesn't really make sense. No matter what you're told, doesn't really make sense until you're in it. So it's hard to kind of, until those things become material, it's hard to really imagine how things will pan out.
Well, speaking of panning out, I mean, what if, you've gone through such an interesting journey, right? I mean, and I know your vision started 7 years ago, and obviously in the last couple of years you've actually built the business. You've really set things up. I mean, what have been the biggest highs in the journey? What have you gained the most satisfaction out during the journey building Saigon Cider?
Good question. Obviously winning awards is really great to get some recognition. We also had a World Cider Award this year.
There's a World Cider Award? Sorry.
Yes.
Hang on. So let's Americans use this lovely term and they call it sidebar. Let's sidebar that. Let's just sidebar this for a moment. There's a World Cider Awards. Okay. Can you just give us like a quick overview? Like, what is that? Is that like you and all the world cider makers get together, and is it like a World Beer Awards?
So anyone can enter, and it's judged in the UK. So anyone from around the world can enter. There is also beer one, I believe. I don't know too much about the beer one. But as far as I'm aware, it's the biggest cider award. I'm not sure.
And you send bottles of your lovely cider, by the way, if anyone's just tuning in. This is the original apple, which I'm drinking right now. Hannah's beautiful Saigon Cider. She didn't pay for this, I paid for it. There's no product placement on this. So you send, basically you do FedEx or send your bottles to the awards and they judge them and you win big.
Yes, so you either have to send them or have them already planted in those countries. But usually they need quite a lot. It's a lot to have planted via suitcase trips home. So yeah, it's kind of ridiculous when you're sending glass bottles, like the things they have to do to get them out of Vietnam. It's insane. Yeah, there's a lot.
So you managed to get some. You managed to get some over there, and anyway, now we've quit the sidebar, I guess. So the World Cider Awards. Everyone, if you're an aspiring cider maker, or as Hannah has referred to before in earlier conversations with me, fermentstress, or if you're a wannabe fermentor of cider. So Hannah, anyway, you were saying, so that was one of the peaks, is you entered that competition, the World Cider Awards, and that was one of the highs. You getting some recognition from there?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of them. Also, just scaling up the batches beyond what I imagine has been nice to see, like a huge tank that's got your product inside. That's exciting. And also some of our staff that we've had through the journey have just been amazing, like absolute heroes. So those are real highlights because it's not their baby, but they're willing to go above and beyond for you, and that's just such a nice feeling when it's something that you've built from scratch and they also share some passion with you. So I guess those are the three key highlights.
It's interesting because on the second highlight, it kind of reminds me of a quote a good friend of mine recently shared. I mean, obviously, besides, I think the recognition you've received, and by the way, for those of you who didn't join us earlier, Hannah shared that she'd actually won 2 awards at the Asia Beer Championships recently, which is actually part of the Asia Brewers Network. Promise there's no weird kind of dodgy affiliation here. It's by the way, I mean, for those of you who are just joining, Hannah and I actually know each other quite well. We're actually friends offline as well. So there's no Hannah's not paying for this product placement. I paid for these beers at Beercraft, which is a chain of craft beer restaurants. I actually had lunch there today, and I specifically went so I could actually get a couple of bottles. By the way, I'm actually nearly finished on my original apple. I'm actually about to switch over to the apple and ginger. So Hannah, before we go back into the kind of formal conversation and hearing your insights. So in terms of the availability, we actually got a question from Jean-Ma who said, are you available in Singapore? And I guess it's a good quick question on your availability right now and in the coming period, in the coming few months, where you guys are going to be distributing.
So not yet in Singapore. We're in Vietnam, Cambodia, and in France. And talks in various places. Yeah, France is an interesting one. That was the first export.
Wow, so, that's exciting.
Yeah. So it's available in Paris, which is nice.
Wow, that's awesome. That's. I mean, and France. Look, I mean, I'm certainly not positing myself to be an expert in anything, but France does have a bit of a cider culture, doesn't it? Or I know Western Europe has something of a cider culture.
Yeah. Especially France. So that was a very cool milestone to export our cider from Vietnam to France. And I think the thing they liked about our cider was it's something different to all the other French ciders. So
and how are you? I mean, I'm really actually genuinely curious. Genuinely curious, I should say. I mean, how is it different? I'm not familiar with French cider. I love the idea of it. It sounds very very cosmopolitan. But how is your cider different?
So they use different apples. We use Braeburn, Gala, and Fuji apples, actually from New Zealand.
Perfect. I'm a
because
huge
that's
supporter of you. You've just won yeah. Go
so
New Zealand.
those
Sorry.
are the closest, really, the closest source to Vietnam for any significant apple source. There's China, but we chose New Zealand instead. And in France, they tend to use cider apples, which are a lot smaller, sometimes called bittersweets, and they have a different taste. I went with the apples that we do because I find they create a cider which is easier drinking in the heat. The French ciders as well, they're made using a different process. It's called keeving ciders. So in the breweries that we use, we're actually we piggyback brew. So I go to someone else's brewery and make my cider. So some processes that you would use on the French ciders, they wouldn't really work in those breweries. Like, you need to separate that from beer. So our cider is different in that way. And also, you would never probably see in France a cider with chili in there. So that was one of the main draws for the French importer, was the chili and the ginger.
And so it's almost like you're coming in kind of breaking with French tradition. You know, I mean, I guess I hope you're not creating that there are not cries of sacre bleu when they try the cider with chili.
I don't know, maybe. I think their market is people who have some kind of interest in Vietnam, who have visited here,
Okay.
or perhaps VIE there, who have some affinity with Saigon. People who have some kind of connection to Vietnam are most likely the end users. So it's people who are already looking for something a bit different. I don't think a regular cider would work so well in France. It needs to be something significantly different. And the same for the UK. There's just so much cider available. Why bring in another one from Vietnam? But our varieties are very unique with the chili and the ginger. So that seems to be the attraction for overseas importers.
And you know, you were talking before. I mean, and you mentioned throughout, you know, the conversation about your ciders being perfect for drinking in hot weather, which obviously gets, you know, I think a lot of us listening in tropical Southeast Asian countries. I'm sure some people are not. I mean, besides the ginger and the chili, the dynamic that both of those ingredients adds, which is, you know, I mean, obviously adds. I mean, you know, adds a beautiful element of complexity, at least in my opinion, from the ciders of yours that I've drunk, and it's a really unique, fresh element. In terms of the apple selection, right? You were talking before about New Zealand apples versus apples from other markets, for instance, China. I am from New Zealand, so this question is partly motivated by nationalistic fervor, partly also motivated by just curiosity from the cider production process. And I'm sure other people listening will be interested in this as well, because it kind of reminds me of conversations about, you know, different hops and, you know, different malts and different yeast strains. I mean, does the provenance of an apple, or the genus, the type of an apple, result in a totally different cider?
Yeah, absolutely. So the taste of the juice very much informs the end product.
And I mean, like, for instance, like, you know, I mean, like, without putting you on the spot, but, you know, I mean, I'm drinking the apple and ginger Saigon cider here. I mean, do you use the same apples in your ciders, or do you vary apples based on the taste profile you want in an individual style of cider?
So we've varied them in
curious.
the past, but the current range is from the same apples. The variation in these ones is the spices that we add.
I mean,
you can do all kinds of things.
This apple and ginger cider is absolutely beautiful, and I mean, you know, I think what I love about it is the ginger is really balanced into the cider. It's got a lovely, and there's a lovely carbonation, at least in here as well. There's a beautiful carbonation, and so it isn't, the ginger's not too overpowering. I mean, how do you strike that balance with flavors like ginger and chili? It must be very challenging.
Okay, so that is one of the very challenging things when working in these big breweries, when we're actually craft. So we're trying to retain the craft aspect, which I think we're doing, but that takes so much predicting and planning when you're working in larger breweries than craft. So just for example, the chili has to be added in a certain way in line. It cannot just be kind of added bit by bit after. If that runs for a few seconds too much, then you have very spicy cider. Or if the amount coming out of the filter, because you kind of have to predict in advance, like how much volume are you going to get that you need to add the chili to, because the chili is added after. You really have to kind of be very careful with your calculations and plan for all the things that can go wrong, and also learn through trial and error. What happened last time? Where was this discrepancy? Where can we make it up next time? I think that's really tough. And the fact that chili as well, from batch to batch, the actual chilies that we get can be hotter. So we have to really estimate and go a bit under what we think, and then taste it, and if necessary, up the spice a little bit. But it's very easy to go over. Oh, I can't hear you.
You're talking about, sorry, I was on mute. I was being a Zoom muppet just then. Speaking of, you're talking about doing all this testing and learning. I mean, for the listeners out there, because we've talked about a lot of your successes and how, obviously we're fans. I'm a fan of your business. We did promise trials and tribulations in the conversation today. We are heading toward the end of the session. I'm curious to hear. I mean, like, what are the greatest challenges, or what are some of the biggest failures you've had? And I'm not necessarily saying things that have made you, things that are devastating business-wise, but also, I mean, have you ever had have there's been anything, for instance, that you can see the lighter side of? Have you ever had kind of batches of cider turn out to be completely so spicy that you can't even taste it, or it burns your mouth? I'm just kind of curious to hear some of the challenges to paint a bigger portrait.
So there have been many challenges. A lot of them are specific to here, and the fact that I'm working in a place which speaks a different language, so there can be communication barriers. We have had some super, super spicy chili cider go out during our testing the market phase, where I had helpers who were doing that stage, and they misread the number of chili quantity, so it was going out at more than double the spiciness, and they kept swearing it was right, and it must just be really spicy chilies at the moment because of the season, until I figured it out later, and it was very, very, very hot. So that was amusing. Some people loved it, most people couldn't handle that. And then more unbelievable but like disastrous things have happened where we're working as I've said, with other breweries, so you're always somewhat reliant on them, and we've moved breweries since we've been operating like that, and we have had our stock held to ransom before.
Oh God, by breweries or by the state?
I'll say not by our current brewery. They're fantastic, but previous ones, so that was interesting, unforeseen problems, which took me by surprise. Absolutely. You expect some issues, you expect things to not quite be as you predicted, but that one was really amazing.
I mean, I guess it is Vietnam. I mean, both of us based here, we know that there are some challenges to doing business here that maybe people aren't so public about on international forums. Which is always a difficult part about working here.
Yeah, there's a lot of hearsay as well. I mean, it's not quite like people make out, but certain things do happen, and just the adherence to contracts is a little bit different here.
I mean, and that's interesting because I mean, it's such a big learning experience, right? For anyone doing business in Southeast Asia, whether you're a cider maker, whether you're, I mean, any industry you're in, is just those differences in business culture and, you know, expecting rule of law to be carried across as something that it can be wishful thinking. I mean, taking it kind of like, you know, as we're kind of wrapping up today, you know, in the last kind of 5-10 minutes of the session, I'm kind of curious to kind of wrap up. I have a few questions. I was kind of interested. By the way, everyone, if you've got any questions, feel free to, those of you who are on Zoom, or those of you who are on watching our live stream, feel free to drop us a question as well. Super open. But okay, one thing I'm interested in is if you are trying to convince someone generally, so this isn't just in the Vietnamese context, this could be anywhere, this could be one of your prospective customers in Paris, or someone in Phnom Penh, or someone in Saigon. You know, if someone's like a hardened, grumpy beer drinker, how do you, what are the tactics you've used to kind of to lure them into to seduce them into the world of cider?
Good question. Maybe with the hard craft drinkers, the chili one is quite a hook. Yeah, because well, maybe there's some kind of assumed masculinity around that one, which is maybe why they stick to beer and why they don't like cider, just because of stereotypes. It's often perceived to be a bit more of a female-friendly drink, whereas having the hot, spicy chili sometimes can convince people is almost like the challenge to try it. Other than that, just forcing them.
So force feeding it, just kind of like, force feeding. In New Zealand we have a thing when you're 21. They call it a yardie challenge, where they kind of create this huge awful glass thing. I don't know if I'm sure it's some Commonwealth tradition.
Yes, we have it.
Force feeding people cider. Yeah, it's interesting because cider was the first alcoholic beverage that I tried, and I was a big fan of it when I was kind of 16, 17, 18, which is probably breaking some laws talking about it. But it was back to what you'd said earlier. In New Zealand, there was a culture that if you were 16, it's fine to drink cider. It was a little more socially acceptable to drink than beer. I mean, in the coming, I'm really also curious to hear, like, what have you got next in terms of Saigon Ciders? I mean, one is export plans, but two is also, excited about the different styles you're making. I mean, you've got apple and ginger, original apple, you've got the chili, and you've got the Crispus seasonal. Are you going to expand in the next year or two? Going to expand the seasonal range? Are you going to expand your core range? What's your upcoming strategy?
The Christmas one's going really well. We're out of kegs now, only some in Hanoi. So that's gone pretty well. We hope to introduce some more, despite the fact that our apples are actually not from here because they can't be. I'm really interested in the fruits from Vietnam and spices. So if we do another seasonal, which we hope to do next, then we would look into other Vietnamese fruits that are in season at the time and play with those. We've only just started adding these seasonals, which are much smaller batches, so it gives us that freedom to play around a little bit. So that should be the next step. But we are always looking to bring new people in to work with us and go that little bit bigger. So let's see what happens when this lovely year is finally over.
And by the way, for anyone who's listening, I understand you're actually not looking to hire somebody. Is that right now?
We're always hiring. Yeah.
So if any of you are interested, if you're interested in a profession in the world of cider, you should get in touch with Saigon Cider. Get in touch with Hannah. It's at the very least, she can give you some advice in terms of where to get started. Or maybe there's even a job opportunity waiting in the wings.
Exactly. So please contact me. Thanks.
Hannah, look, I really appreciate you joining today. I think we're perfectly up on the hour. I think today's been a great chat. I think one of the parting, probably the parting question I was curious to hear is, where do you see cider going in the next few years in Asia and around the region? I mean, you're obviously familiar with, and you're competing with other this friendly competition with other cideries in Vietnam and around the region. Do you there's that 8% statistic I was throwing out about the growth. Do you think cider has got that growth, or do you think maybe it's even going to grow faster around the region? I was really curious to hear your take on the prospects of the beverage in the coming years.
It's definitely got huge potential, and it's currently less saturated than craft beer. So I mean, I've heard plans of other overseas existing brands trying to come into Vietnam, because it's a really great place to be, especially with our COVID-free situation. And that can only having them as one huge mass market cider here, which has really helped let local people know that cider exists. Having competitors is actually very good for us, reaching out to different groups within the country. So I'm sure more will come in. And I hope that together we can really raise awareness of what cider is and all do well from that.
Oh, look, that's great, and look, I'm stoked. And I mean, I'm a big fan of your guys' product, and I'm a big fan of the brand. By the way, for those of you who are still listening, there's still a few of you. I'm currently sipping on the apple and ginger, so just to prove that Hannah's prospects for the region aren't just coming out of nowhere. She's actually making some beautiful, absolutely beautiful ciders. Hannah, you're still drinking that? Is that still the chili? The apple and chili, is that the right designation?
Apple and chili, yeah.
Apple and chili, which Hannah mentioned before is the gateway drug for the more serious craft drinkers into the world of cider. But look, Hannah, I just wanted to thank you. It's been a really awesome session today. It's really cool as well to hear about someone who's transitioned outside of the beverage industry into building a really successful local brand, or one that's now a global brand. So look, thank you so much for joining and sharing your sage advice with our audience. Look, for those of you who are interested in finding out more, a quick Google search on Saigon Cider. You can find their website. Saigon Cider is also active on Facebook as well, so you can follow them. I'd really encourage you to, doing some really cool stuff. Again, just to reiterate, if Saigon Cider is currently available in Vietnam, of course, and by bottle and draft around the country, available in France and Paris. So if any of you are based in France or have friends in France, I get them some Saigon Cider as a Christmas gift. And also in Cambodia as well. And I know that the Cambodian, the Asia Brewers Network, we've got a great Cambodian support base. So if you're in Phnom Penh or in Siem Reap, or one of the other urban centers in Cambodia, seek out Saigon Cider. These are the two bottles. I've finished one, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through another. And I am sort of relatively lucid. So there you go. It's a sessionable drink in a tropical climate. So again, Hannah, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, thank you.
And look, have a good luck in the coming months as you look to expand and grow. And I'm really excited to hear about your seasonals and how well they're selling. The fact you're out of the Christmas beer is a Christmas cider, I should say. Sorry, it's wonderful. Yeah, just got to remember it's not Asia Brewers Network today; it's Asia Cider Network. And otherwise, look, have a great Christmas and New Year, and best of luck in the coming months as your business grows.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
And see you soon, Hannah. And look, for those of you who've tuned in, we really appreciate it. Asia Brewers Network, look, we're a relatively new portal, really trying to look at building out a community around people working in the brewing scene and beer, cider, and other brewed beverages. So, again, drop by our website. Please give us a like on Facebook. We'd really appreciate that. We're still very much building out our community. Lots of educational resources, insights, news from around the region. We recently published pieces covering everywhere from North Korea to Pakistan to Bhutan, Palestine, everywhere in between. Of course, Vietnam, Cambodia, Singapore, Japan, South Korea, all the places you would expect as well. So thanks again for tuning in to this episode of ABN Talks. We'll be back in January. So all of you have a wonderful Christmas and New Year. Stay safe. Happy Hanukkah for those of you who are celebrating as well. And otherwise, we hope to catch you in about a month's time for our next ABN Talk session. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we will be in touch soon. Cheers.